Hey guys, and welcome to the 9th episode of Memetaa TV. Now, I was given a small request to do a bit about tier lists. I'm not a huge fan of the topic, but I do get a lot of questions about it, and I've been questioned about who I think is good and who I think is bad in this game. So I will do my best to answer that, just because it is something that I believe had to be addressed eventually. So I kind of made my tier list based on a few things. I studied a few Japanese tier lists that people have come up with, but since the community is a lot of online players, and online cannot be quite compared at all, at least from the original. I don't know how the re-release for Western has improved online, if at all, but due to the serious amount of slowdown that the Japanese version suffers from, it is very hard to say that playing online gives you anywhere near the experience as offline. But that in mind, I did talk to a lot of friends that I know play a lot offline. I've talked to other people who played offline and have tried to construct tiers based on that. And generally, it really wasn't that huge a factor. But, after that, I just put my own thoughts into it, and generally that is the tier list we got. So before we kind of look at it extensively, just remember that, as always, tier lists are never set in stone, and because only so many people touch this game, a lot of this can change, and a lot of the stuff in the middle of the tier, I'm pretty sure upper tier and bottom tier are pretty affirmed by most people, but the mid tier was a lot of arguments and a lot of disputes. So if you see your character in C tier or A tier, and there's any kind of discrepancy, it's basically just a opinion thing at that point, and a lot of players will say things about their characters that are, no, my character isn't this great, or no, my character is better than this. So, take what I am showing you with a grain of salt. But with that said, let's look at the tier list. Now, basically how to look at this is, top to bottom, we going down S+, S, A, B, C, D, E, and F. The separation does kind of get a little huge at some points, but just to kind of give you an idea how to look at it, S, of course, S and S plus are your characters that they're not devastatingly broken in any sense, but they do have a lot of tools and combos that are they excel a lot above the other characters, and you should be knowing that you'll see all these characters a lot. And later in this tutorial, I will go over into what makes each of these three characters good, so I won't go into it too much yet. The A tier is about 10 characters. If you're interested in any one of these characters, then you shouldn't be too worried, because this is still a top tier area. Basically the only problem is these characters just lack like one move, or the one move or 2 or 3 abilities that the upper tier characters have that make them really great. But otherwise, if you play one of these characters, there is absolutely no reason you can't beat one of the S tier characters, because it is not a terrible matchup by any means, and just probably means that you don't understand it. But it will not be as uphill as if you choose a lower tier character. If you pick from B tier, again, this is still above average, and this is another 9 characters, so quite a big portion of the cast that actually falls pretty high on the tier list. And to be honest, you'll find a lot of characters that can be interchanged between B and A. All these characters are just considered below A because they maybe have a part of their game that is really great, but is offset by a part of the game that is really terrible. But otherwise, some of these characters are interchangeable. I have a lot of Johnny players that are, well affirmed that they feel like he is an A tier character. I gave them the benefit of the doubt and said that because he still struggles a lot off his horse, that he can still be considered B tier. But this and that, just know that you won't be suffering a humongous uphill battle against S tier, but it will probably be a little worse than the A tier. The C tier is your general average. All these characters, not necessarily either they have a huge amount of average tools, that just don't compete with those above them, or they have some huge flaw to their game that just makes it kind of hard to offset what makes them great, aka Pucci, Cars, and Hermes. They're all pretty great characters, and parts of them can do really well if you can get them out. But the point is, if a character gets on you and you literally can't get your game started, you will probably get rolled over just because of how flawed you are in certain parts of your game. But again, don't think of this as a firm position, and all these characters are all pretty strong, and this is probably the last tier you can really pick from and still stand on pretty equal ground with most of the cast. Going down below, we finally fall to D tier, which is the below average characters. You'll find the problem with most of these characters isn't necessarily that they maybe lack tools, but they maybe have a hard time getting as much damage as other characters. For example, Kakuin and Sapali do not have the highest damage outputs, while characters like Lisa and Fugo are actually pretty hard-hitting characters, but they have some pretty terrible normals that just make it really hard to get a hit. And actually Bao falls here for the specific reason that he has a bug that renders him in a longer guard stun than any other character. So he is unfortunately cursed here for one of the most saddest reasons, which is the fact that he just doesn't work right. But if you are trying to use one of the sponge, you will generally feel like you're fighting a uphill battle, but it is not an impossible battle to win. And last is our E to F tier. Now once again, I'm going to try and talk about these characters later. Just in general, they either reek of no damage, no combos, and in the case of Iggy, very low health, so it takes a lot of effort to make them shine. So, you know, I won't recommend that you pick any of these characters, but if you really want to try to make them work, you know, go at it. Just know that if you're going to fight an S tier character, that you're going to have a lot of trouble. So that's basically all how I would divide up the tiers, and, you know, just go ahead and take it, like I said, take it with a grain of salt. But from here on out, I'm going to try and move to discussing the top tier characters, what makes them great, and the bottom tier characters and what makes them horrible. So let's just jump to that. So to start off, let's just take a look at Vanilla Ice. Now, Vanilla Ice is the one DLC character that was actually given the, I don't know, sharp end of the stick when it came, because, as you could have seen on the chart, about, you know, 80% of the DLC characters are actually on D tier, or lower. So why is Vanilla Ice, like, such a great character? Generally, he's just the example of a character that got everything and the better half of everything. His normals are actually really great. You can't actually see it from here, but in actual matches, you'll actually feel how great his normals are. Generally, he has one of the easiest to do combos in the game that can actually equal a lot of damage. I can't actually do it because I don't play him, but he does actually have that, as well as the fact he can do, like, kind of like Dio, he can go into a lifesteal. While it's not a huge amount of life, he does get quite a bit of gauge from it, and generally his gauge gain is pretty high. Alongside this, he does have this move, which not only doubles as a combo part, but you can actually use it, you know, against certain characters to help outspace them, and, you know, as a character that generally isn't a zoning character, this move gives him a bit of zoning ability, not to mention to the fact you can delay it to, you know, be a little more unpredictable, and it gives opponents a lot harder time figuring out when you're going to throw it out. So if they want to counteract it, you can easily counteract them by just changing your timing, or, you know, changing the position at which it comes out. And since you have like 5 or 6 different options as to what you can do with it, this can be really threatening whether your opponent is far or close to you. Not to mention, this is a unblockable. It's not counted as a projectile actually, but it can nullify quite a few, and you will have to learn how to deal with it, you know, depending on what character you're using. Basically, alongside all this, he also does have his stand mode, which during this, he's basically completely invincible, added with the fact you can combo this into itself. If you saw that damage that was all from that. So, you know, since this hits on the ground, it's actually an incredibly threatening move. And just, I don't know. I don't know why they actually made it so you can combo this into itself, but that's kind of how it is. And if you full charge it and are able to hit with all 5, it does do a large amount of damage to characters. Actually, how much damage should that do? So 300, and that's absolute, well, 350, and that's absolutely no gauge. So as long as you're charging stand, it's basically just a bonus, and that can hit on the ground, so you can even use it as a combo extender, as well as just in general, it's a great move. And I mean, if you use the heavy version, it goes really fast across the screen, and it kind of tracks as well. So it gives opponents a really hard thing to dodge, especially if you have the entire meter stocked, you can move in about 5 different directions. So if they dodge maybe 1 or 2, you still have 3 more that you can try and hit them with. And that's basically Vanilla Ice. So let's just jump from Vanilla Ice to the remaining 2 top tier characters. Hey guys, so let's just jump right back into it with our next 2 top tier characters, which would be Whole Horse and Diavolo. Now, just start with Whole Horse because he is the most commonly named top tier character outside of Vanilla Ice, and his top tier ability is pretty easy to understand, which is quarter circle back attack. Basically his entire status is based on this move alone, just because it is a very annoying move. And this is Whole Horse's Hangman. Now once this is activated, you'll notice the puddle comes into effect. And basically once that's in effect, you can press quarter circle back attack again, and you can summon the Hangman. Now this wouldn't be such a problematic move if you can only summon it at certain times, but the fact is you can summon it during times when Whole Horse is getting attacked. Say you get hard knockdown, you can still summon it. Say you're jumping, you can also summon it. So you can summon Hangman basically when you're doing about anything, and this is very annoying for opponents because if you have a puddle next to you and they're comboing you, then you can easily get out of their combos, and sometimes if it wasn't a knockdown, you can combo them back. So it's basically that while they thought they had gotten a free hit on you, it essentially turns into a reverse situation. On a hard knockdown, this can screw up a lot of people's Okezumi abilities, and in general it is a really annoying move to deal with alongside Whole Horse's projectiles. Now his projectiles don't have any tracking ability, which is great because that's one less thing to worry about, but you know, as long as Whole Horse has a puddle near him and he's standing next to it, he basically has the best defense in the world. And in this game, you know, with that alone, because it's a free burst out of damage. And luckily it does vanish within I think like 10 seconds or so, but it's still something you have to worry about until that happens. And on the other note of this move, this is actually really great anti-air at the same time, plus it sets puddle right next to him, so you know, it's a doozy. We'll just say that much. So that's about all there is to say about Whole Horse. He has access to some other great tools, he has some great combos, and he also can do down taunts, or taunt combos, there we go, that are actually really effective. So that's another thing that you can add to his arsenal of tricks. Now Diavolo, on the other hand, is a character that's not necessarily put in the top tier position. I believe he deserves to be there, some other people don't, but I'll just give my reasoning, which is generally, let's see if I can do his bread and butter combo. Now, I didn't get the down attack, but say you get the down attack there, that bread and butter does about 300 damage, and it takes absolutely no gauge. And that was without, you know, just from stand confirm. If you get a jump in, then of course it does do more damage. This is a combo that builds Diavolo a lot of meter for no meter, and it generally does almost as much damage as some characters can do with, you know, using meter. So it's a very threatening combo and does give Diavolo a lot of power, because without this, or with this combo, it means he has to spend less gauge to do damage to you, which means he can do things like, say you actually hit with the down attack after this, you can activate that into a free epitaph, which means you just use, you know, 1 gauge and you get free stylish moves for until this runs out. And then of course there are things like his counter super, which you can use, and his burst, which, since you're not worrying about gauge as much to do big combo damage, it is, you know, pretty nice to have the extra gauges that you can use the burst if you really want to. Alongside this, he does have his counter in basically all his, you know, what I would stand on or stand off. And this counter is about everything. It can counter projectiles, it can counter highs and lows. I believe it counters lows. Let's see. Didn't need to count. Yep, it counters highs and lows. Basically the only thing I believe it doesn't counter is throws and supers. So let's see. Let's make sure doesn't counter supers, otherwise we have... Okay, so it doesn't counter supers, but it does counter highs, lows, and projectiles, which means this is one of the things that I think puts Diavolo at top tier, is because he can compete with Whole Horse so easily that, you know, he can abuse this taunt, and basically during this time, your opponent can't move, so you can get close to them as much as you want, and it is for about like 5 seconds or so or like 2 seconds or so that lasts, and that gives you time to, you know, get a low, or, you know, you can go for whatever mix-up you want, because the second you press a button, time will move again, so your opponent does have time to react to it. But just remember that you can easily get in on them using, if you like, someone's trying to outspace you with projectiles. If you time this correctly, then that basically rendered them useless. So with tools like that, his 2 gauge is a counter, it's actually really fast, so it's pretty practical to use. And then his burst, put that with his bread and butter, and then of course there is this combo as well, which this standing heavy is actually pretty good air-to-air because it is really fast and really powerful. And the big thing is whether the opponent is in the air or on the ground, it does do a ground bounce. And Diavolo loves ground bounces because he has this move, which relaunches opponents no matter if they're in ground bounce or not. So you do this. And, you know, you can cancel that as many times as you want, and that is very painful damage. So Diavolo would stand on, can, you know, launch into that combo if he wants, or, you know, as long as he hits you with this jumping heavy to counter your air-to-air, or, you know, do an air-to-air, or even just hits you while you're on the ground. That can equal pretty big damage if he has meter. So Diavolo is a very scary character. He has a lot of tools to combat you, whether you are a zoner or a fellow rushdown character, and actually rushdown characters probably do deal with him better because it's really hard to keep Diavolo out. Especially, I also should mention that his backstep and his forward step during that time where he does vanish, that is invincible. So, you know, I don't see why most people don't consider him top tier. I can see why some don't, but generally to me, all his tools, and if you use them properly, are, you know, on par with Vanilla Ice and Whole Horse very easily. So that is the top tier, and after that I guess I will quickly go over the bottom tier characters and what makes them as bad as they are. So I will see you in that section. Alright, to kind of wrap up this tutorial, we have the bottom 3, which is our E tier and our F tier, aka Icky tier. Now, let's start with Shigekyo, or Shigechi, or Fatty, whatever you like. Technically, he's the less prone to being considered in the E tier. I mean, some people put him in D, and I think recently a lot of people have been finding a little more use for him. But the fact still stands, you are a small character, and it is very hard for people to hit you, but with limbs like these, you can imagine it is about twice as hard for you to hit other characters. And that's generally Shigechio's big problem, not to mention the fact that every time you use your moves, you do slowly get rid of Harvest. But, you know, basically on the strengths, and if you want to do a lot of big damage, you will really need like all 3 called, and just having to basically, you know, recall them every single time you want to do decent damage can just make combos really hard. It really does him no favors, and in general it's just the fact that your range is so bad, you have to keep calling Harvest, and, you know, for like they'll be used for any of your special attacks, so you have to be ready to recall, and your opponent won't necessarily give you that much time. All this combined with the fact he really doesn't have any great way to anti-air outside of, you know, maybe this. It's just a really rough matchup for him in basically all respects, because once an opponent can hit you, it's basically over. Just because, I mean, it's really hard for you to hit them, and you'll probably just be struggling at that point to close the gap back. Now, Kawajiri, aka Kira's other, or the Kira that's actually not DLC, technically bottom tier by himself without counting the DLC. But since normal Kira is sitting pretty up in top tier, Y is the lower, or whereas Kawajiri stuck on the bottom with the fat kid and the dog. The general problem with Kawajiri is he has a lot of great tools that are just not, they don't feel all that complete. Like this, it does give you a hit of super armor for a little bit of gauge, but it is literally only one hit of super armor, and it's really not that great and can only be used in very, very, very specific situations. He has absolutely no real combos that you can do with gauge, or even with no gauge. That might be the best you have. His 1 gauge super is a counter super, his 2 gauge is kind of unreliable, and sometimes when people have tried to combo into it, it does randomly drop because it is kind of oddly sensitive. So with an unreliable 2 and no real way to use gauge outside of maybe having all 3 to do decent damage, he's just a really, really hard character to make work properly, and that's about it. It's just unfortunate, but without any real combos and with all his tools feeling as incomplete, and for some of them being nearly suicidal because they're so slow and just so limited use, it's hard to put him on tiers with anybody else, especially when most, at least every other character has some decent hard-hitting combos they can do with 3 gauges. So it's an unfortunate thing, and if an update ever comes, I'm sure Kawajiri will hopefully get buffed, because most people have complained about him. But that is a future statement, and with that, we basically only have to go down one more tier to Iggy. So to finish out this tutorial, or kind of little guide here, what makes Iggy Iggy tier? Now, for starters, Iggy has the lowest health in the game, and a lot of basically combos that would not do as much damage to other characters does a ton of damage to Iggy. So if a character decides to expend gauge on you, especially even just one, you'll find it does almost half of your bar, which obviously is going to put you in peril, because that means if you get hit by 2 combos, it's basically game over. Outside of that, it's important to remember in the recent patch, while Iggy with stand on did get buffed a lot, and he can do some pretty interesting things, and in fact he is a pretty interesting character. The fact stands that with stand off, he's only a small character, and that's basically his only merit. But otherwise, the problem is, if you want to do anything, you will have to call your stand, which makes you a bigger target, a much bigger target for your opponent to hit. But, I mean, this is the only way you can actually do anything you want to do, get some decent combos and decent damage. So, it's just a thing of, you have to call it if you want to do anything, but once the second you call it, it means you're putting yourself at risk to hit a huge combo, because this makes it so basically every character's normal combo can hit on you. And that's unfortunately Iggy, the sad story of Iggy. Still a really fun character to play, but just remember you have no health, and the second you call stand, you're putting yourself at a huge risk. But the second you call stand, your game gets a lot more interesting, because you can do air dashes, like instant overheads on about half the cast, and a lot of other interesting things. But that basically finishes out today. Like I kind of said, don't worry too much about the tiers too much, to start off. Play a character you like and kind of find out how they work. And, like I said, the list can change, so don't feel like since you're playing a D tier character that they will be D forever. There is a chance that you might find something that makes them very formidable. And, the S tier characters, if anything else, learn how to deal with them. Study what makes them so great, and study what kind of things you can do to counteract what they like to abuse. So like I said, against Whole Horse, find your best ways to deal with Hangman. For Vanilla Ice, find out ways to counter his various, it's hard to counter his stand mode, but for his other projectiles you can actually counter them pretty easily if you have the right characters. And you can find a lot of interesting ways to take your characters to new heights, so don't be too discouraged and try and find what works best for you before you start thinking too hard about this tier list. So until then guys, rate, comment, subscribe, and I hope this maybe helped give you an idea. And thanks for watching.